And these two, like probably like 5-year-olds, came up to 5 to 7-year-olds came up to the window where I was working, and they had they both had phones in their hands. Parents are like nowhere to be seen, and they asked me a question. Can you think about what the question could be that they asked?
What should they do when they grow up? You know where life's going to take you, but you'll meet some cool people along the way. Each person has their own story, and each moment is precious. So enjoy the moments and enjoy the journey. Mike, Tea with Mike, the iconic Tea with Mike. Welcome to the journey.
I'm excited. I'm like, what a great name, The Journey, because everybody has a journey and everybody has stories to tell, which I'm sure we're going to dive a little deeper into.
Yes, we are, Mike. Yes, we are. So I'm so glad to have you on the journey and hear about your journey of where you are, where you've been, and where you're going. So, Mike, just kind of give a little backstory. Did we meet on Twitter first or Clubhouse first? Because we had so many different things going that I felt like I don't know what the exact point of us meeting is, but there's just so much history
Twitter.
of us. It was Twitter?
Yeah, Twitter, and then obviously like mutual connections that we both know on Twitter, the likes of Jeremiah, Chef Lizette, Ginger, DJ Realty, David, and a bunch of other people. So I guess that's how we found each other per se. How long do you think it's been since we've known each other, like digitally?
It's been a pretty long time because we started that Clubhouse room in the beginning of this year, right? Like it was
beginning of the year, and then we kept it going for a good 4 months, and then life just got busy, right?
Then it did, and we probably started interacting on Twitter before that. So maybe we probably have like a year, maybe like a year plus.
Yeah, it must be for sure coming up to like a year minimum, right? Because you've been on my podcast, and and we did a social media live too, didn't we, on Instagram about personal training too, right? So yeah, probably about a year.
Yes, so I'm thinking about a year too, which is awesome. It's crazy how long we've already been in communication, and just watching each other grow as podcaster to podcaster, man. Now, Mike.
But then also the fascination of we're connected, but then life gets busier, and obviously we don't communicate as much, but we're always there. And I know you're seeing my stuff, even though you may not always have time to engage. So I find that piece really fascinating too. And then when the time's right, recording this podcast, we come back together.
Yeah, we do come back together. It all comes back full circle. It really does. So, Mike, I want to hear the Mike story, from the beginning. You were born in the UK?
Yes, sir.
So can you give me a little idea what you were like back then? What that was like for you in that time period, school wise, just motivation wise? I want to get the story of how you became Tea with Mike now, but were you as a kid, I want to play with microphones, I want to be on media? What was that?
Okay, sure. Yeah. Okay. So obviously, as you referenced, I grew up in England. I'm 25 now, just for a little bit of context for people that will be listening to this. And so I lived in a place called North Yorkshire, in a town called Richmond. And I can't remember how many people there were, but it was very green grass, very countryside, lots of farms. This definitely wasn't a city life. It was a town life, a lot of small businesses, a lot more small shops versus big chains. And so I went to town, and I went to a school called Richmond's School. It was a good experience. Probably about 1,500 people in the entire school. So 5 years plus a sixth form. I actually lived I moved around quite a bit when I was younger, from place to place, but I probably spent the longest in a village. Actually, it was called
Really?
Hudswell. Yeah, and it was just outside of Richmond. So I used to take the school bus down narrow like country lanes to school. It took about maybe 15, 20 minutes to get to school. And in the village, there was probably only like, it's probably grown a bit now, but there's maybe less than 200 people. It's one road. You come through the country lanes. You drive through the village. It's literally one lane. You have to pull over because it's not narrow. It's not that wide. There's a pub in the village. There's a little village hall, and then a bunch of farms as you come out the other side. And it's just a long road with fields on either side till you hit the next village, basically. So very, very, very quiet. But there's a large military base in a place called Catterick Garrison. So like you got Richmond in one direction, you got Catterick Garrison kind of in the other direction, and a bunch of other towns as you get further out. And they used to drive like their military vehicles through the villages. They were doing military exercises. So some people grow up like seeing Jay-Z walk down the street. I grew up with military tanks like rolling down the street and doing exercises in the field, and you'd see them jump out of helicopters and that type of thing. So that's a little bit about the setting of where I grew up. And then in school, I guess I was very energetic, enthusiastic. I always wanted everybody to love me. And I tried to impress everyone, which I'll get to probably again in a little bit. I thought was the best idea for life at the time, to get to know everybody, but you quickly realize like who you're the most connected to, and nobody in the world knows everyone. Even celebrities, they have their social media following, but if you ask them how many people are they actually close to, it's probably for the most part going to be less than 7, probably, quite frankly. And yeah, I just tried too hard to impress the wrong people, and then I struggled in school a little bit. I always tried hard, but it always took me a long time to learn the same piece of content as somebody else. I had some learning differences when I was in school. I had ADHD and dyslexia, but the kicker for me was I kind of didn't discover those struggles that I had until I was getting close to leaving school. And if I discover, and that's just the way life works sometimes, because you have to go through tests and all of that. But if I'd known that sort of stuff like closer to when I was beginning school, I could have done a lot better. And all it really boils down to is different ways of learning the same information. And so it was that piece. And then I wasn't really a math and science type of guy. I kind of liked English literature, like Shakespeare, a little bit more of that sort of side, like analyzing poetry was where I tended to do best. And then of course, like theater was always in the like school productions, did a lot of acting in different shows.
Are you acted too?
Oh yeah, I played Franz the Butler in Sound of Music. I was in like Oliver Twist, Little Shop of Horrors. Yeah, lots of cool stuff. And it was always my favorite environment, just because the people that I was surrounded by were super open, like super accepting, and that for me really felt like a safe space. Even though I knew people that played on the sports teams, even though I knew people that were the nerdy art kid, that was probably reflecting back was the environment that I felt the most comfortable in. I also had a short tempo when I was in school, and I used to turn like bright red when I was embarrassed. So I would say I was out and out like picked on it. Like I wasn't getting punched in the face and having my stuff stolen, but like people knew how to push my buttons, and because I was at an age when I didn't know how to channel or control that, I tended to explode into pieces of anger and that type of thing. Now, if I was a different kid in school that the teachers didn't deep down like, I feel like some of my actions could have got me into a lot more trouble
Mm,
than in reality that I did get into. If I keep it pretty broad, but if I think of other people in the school that were known as the troublemakers and some of the things that they did and the consequences they faced versus what I faced, it didn't quite match up. But I was always a good kid at heart, and I think that's what ultimately the teachers saw. So yeah, and then so that's so that's kind of like school. I was always I think I missed less than a week of school in 5 years.
wow,
I had like 100% attendance for like 3-4 years in a row, and like in a year of like maybe 200 people, maybe like 2 to 3 people achieve that. So that's something that I'm always like proud of.
that's awesome. That's awesome. That's a big move, man. Attendance like that is huge. It's huge. So you're in Richmond, right? In the village in London, in England, not London. England's the place, London's the city. Uh,
No, so this is Northern England. So even though there is a Richmond in London, this is like the other end of the country, closer
oh
to like
wow.
Leeds, Newcastle. It's quicker to get to Scotland than it is to get to London. You imagine
Okay.
England,
Hmm.
like Southampton, maybe London's like sort of over here. I'm all the way up here.
Oh shit. Okay.
Yeah, so quite a ways from London.
Yeah, I got to work on my geography for places outside of the U.S. I'm very much like one of those people. I'm working on getting my brain more global, but I'm just like, I know it's on that side, but I'm working on that. Now, for you though, you're in Richmond. You're this kid you're like attending school, but you're having fun, dealing with some things. But you know what? You got some energy. You know, you're not like the regular kid out there. You got some.
No.
You want to use this energy somehow. You don't know what you're going to do. When does the move to Canada, right?
Yeah.
When does that take place? What inspires that? How do you get there? How do you say I want to leave this small town and go off to a whole other country? That's a huge jump, bro.
Yeah, which I don't. I'm glad we're kind of digressing into this because that's something I don't really think about on a daily basis. So actually, just before I answer that, a piece that I missed out that was critical to my upbringing was outside of um, outside of school. I did theater at a local theater called the Georgian Theater Royale, and it's this Georgian theater going back to like the 17th, 18th century, and it's in its original form, and it's like so magical to me. It's got like all the chandeliers and the Shakespearean boxes and a wooden stage, and that's something I'll always remember because that's when I felt like the truly authentic me was when I was appearing in shows on the stage. And then I also did a little bit of like technical theater too with the local youth theater. And so when I was on that stage in that building was when I felt the most comfortable in myself. And then so I just thought that was something important to add. And then I moved to Canada when I was at 17, and how the move came about was we were on a holiday in Geneva, Switzerland at my uncle's wedding, and my parents worked very hard to maintain a good life for us in England. But that came as a consequence, right? My mom was a teacher, my dad's an architect. And so we didn't get to have actually that much quality time as a family. And that's just because they're working like to really really hard to maintain what we have. So I'm very grateful to them for that. And so the idea came into my dad's head because he saw how happy my uncle was, my mom's brother.
Mhm.
And so quietly in the background, he didn't actually tell me and my sister until a lot further along in the process. He started plotting on like how he could get more of a work-life balance. And so he eventually got headhunted for a company here in Canada. So to answer your question, we moved because of my dad's job occupation.
Okay. Okay. Cool. So dad's plotting on the way out. You guys moved to Canada. What is the dynamic in Canada? Like, what kind of place where do you live in Canada now versus being from a village in a whole other country? Like, that must be a big paradigm shift as far as like culture and placing, even weather temperature. So, how can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, sure. So it's very different. So I live in Red Deer, Alberta, Canada. Last time I checked the population, just over 100,000. So
That's a big switch right there.
yeah, no, it is. It is in some ways it is quite a big switch. Um, it's how people ask me this all the time, like to compare the two, but the more I think about it, the more you really can't compare the two, just because it's so different. So I'm going from somewhere where it rained like 300 out of 365 days a year, very wet, very rainy, like very like, cold, to a place with like below -30, -40 temperatures. This yeah. So we actually moved in December of 2013, like when it was super frigid. It was it was just after Christmas, actually. It was in between Christmas and New Year, and it was like one of the coldest winters that this part of Canada had had in quite some time. And I remember, so you know how you see all these advertisements, like, so we bought what we thought was all the correct like winter equipment that we needed in England. And then we get to Canada and we realize that none of the stuff we bought is actually any good for the reality of the temperatures. We realized this, and and so we had to like buy new winter jackets, new snow boots, because the ones we had were just like slipping everywhere, and it was it was kind of surreal.
Wow.
And
Wow.
yeah, oh, oh, yeah, it was just surreal. Oh, and then the first time we like stepped outside, or the first few times,
Mhm.
the body, because you're a personal trainer, so I'm sure you can give some science to this. Just the body just wasn't used to the temperatures, and as soon as I stepped outside, like my entire nose basically like froze, and all the like nostril hairs and my whole face basically literally froze because I wasn't used to the temperature.
That's yeah, that's a lot. That's a lot. The temperature change, the and they definitely don't make clothes the same way. Like if you live in a place that's cold like that versus a place that's like it's kind of cold, they don't make the same clothes for the cold that you would in either spot.
And, and you think they would, because a lot of these companies international, right? But it seems to be very specific to the country that they're operating.
Hmm. Hmm. So did you go to school? So you moved there when you were 17. So did you do like a high school there, or did you do a college? Like what schooling were you in, and how did that affect you from your growth of like being ADD-ish and being a good kid but kind of getting in trouble? How was that transformation, that process for you?
Sure. So because this was a weird thing, because the schooling system is, I would say, not comparable, just the way it's structured. In England, you do 4 years of, at least when I was there, you do 4 years of compulsory education till you're 16. Then at that point, you can choose to leave school. You might go and do an apprenticeship. You just might get a job straight away. The majority of people in England, at least where my school, like stay on and do like A levels. And A levels is what you need to go to university, basically. It's
Okay.
an extra 2 years of schooling, and you start to specialize in certain subjects, right?
Mhm.
So the first step really in your career path. And then flipping to Canada, um, I I had I had to do I had to do one semester of grade 12, and we're sitting in the principal's office, and they're trying to figure out like how do my qualifications in England fit into a high school diploma. And quite frankly, because I think some of the issue was because I arrived at such a late stage of like what a North American's school career per se. The principal, and there's probably no framework, because really, how much does this happen? They had like no idea like how to translate the two. So we sit in the principal's office, and they were like trying to figure out what I still needed to take to get a high school diploma, and she was like, "How good were you at phys ed?" I'm like, "I was all right. All right, we'll give you a 70." She was literally we were making it up as we went along to like, yeah, to figure out the requirements. So I ended up doing social studies at COM because everybody has to do that. What a waste of a class. I got to do drama, which I made a really good like
There we go.
connection with a teacher that I still talk to actually today, and he actually employed me later on to work with some of his productions, so that was kind of cool. And English, I had to do English, and so that was kind of the rest of high school here. But it was weird because like everybody's already known each other for like for so many years, and I'm coming in at this at late stage. People have already decided who they're going to graduation with, and to me, I'm like, I just did all of this really, if you're being honest, back when I was in England, and but I made some good friends. I think the only reason, at least for that period of time, I don't talk to any of those people anymore, but I do see them like just out and about once in a while. I think the only reason why people spend time with me because it was like, oh, it was something new and fresh, like so late in their school career. They're like, oh, who's this kid with the British accent? Oh, and then I'll say terminology that has clearly very different meanings here, and they'd all like burst down into laughter
You remember
and
one in
that type of
particular
thing.
that you said that had different translations?
100%, man. I was doing some like homework because there was some free periods to work on stuff. So sitting around this table with some people that the counselor introduced me to. So that was kind of nice of them. And I was like, I made a mistake on my piece of work, and I was like, "Can somebody please pass me the rubber?" And I'm like, "What?" Because eraser and rubber in England are the same thing.
That makes
And
sense.
yeah, and then I just thought, and then they were like, "What?" And then so I just thought they misheard me, so I said it like even louder, and and then I started doing my thing, and everyone else is like, "Stop!" There's probably about there's a good 8 people probably at this table minimum, and I'm like, "What are you laughing about? I'm just rubbing out my mistake on my piece of work that I'm doing." And then somebody politely informed me of what that word means in North America to keep this diplomatic. So there was a few like quirky things
That's a
like that,
great
but
story right there. It's a great that's a funny mix up. Eraser for rubber and eraser for rubber is known for on this side is a very big it's a very big transition. Cool. That's a culture shock right there.
yeah. But I think what made it more funny was like because in my head there's nothing wrong with me talking about those words because of what those words mean to me personally versus obviously North American audiences. So I guess that's a good story. And then just to accelerate a little bit, I obviously did all that, went to the grad, all that, whatever, cool. And then I was like, what do I want to do next? And the only thing that I honestly enjoyed doing in school was theater. So I took like a 2-year theater program, learning about behind the scenes at Red Deer College, which was in the town Red Deer that I currently reside in. And so then after graduating, that was a little better because at college everybody makes a fresh start. So I didn't feel like I was behind per se.
Mhm.
And I had some cool experiences there. Obviously, a little bit of the college party life and stuff. And then I worked in the industry for maybe like 2 years, doing lighting for shows and setting up
Nice.
shows. Working on like Cirque du Soleil shows and doing like follow spot operation. Have you heard of Salt and Pepper?
Hmm.
Yeah, so they came to my local city, so I got to work on that show. So lots of like
Wow,
cool,
really?
yeah,
So
yeah, like yeah,
that's amazing.
touch it, yeah, yeah, and yeah, so it's cool stuff like that. And then I also got into security around that time, kind of to fill the gaps, and got to do security for like NHL hockey and the Juno Awards. And I once, this is a good story. It was just random, but ended up doing security on the weekends dressing room.
Really?
Yeah, how does an English kid at like 5 foot whatever like end up on the weekends dressing room? I don't know, but that's how it goes. That's how it happens. Because I worked with a company that like obviously had a bunch of like contracts for different places, and it's not like the weekend person had me to do security for him. I was just as part of the venue operations. That's the
That's
best way of
awesome.
describing about it.
Did you actually see him?
Yeah, I did. Like what happens in a venue stays in the venue,
Of
right? It's
course.
like going to Vegas.
Of course. Of course. Of course.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah,
That's
so,
cool though.
and then I met a whole bunch of like other artists along the way. Another good story was um uh, so they're called the Bare Naked Ladies. I believe they're Canadian, and they got inducted into like the Canadian Music Hall of Fame, and
Mm.
so they were on tour, and they brought along this vintage pinball machine that they took around with them.
Oh wow.
And I happened to be in charge of like the local crew for the day, like setting up on the show just because people weren't available, and I was like that, and it was small, so that was kind of cool. So I got a picture of me playing on the Bare Naked Ladies like vintage pinball machine. So lots of cool moments there. And my favorite thing about the whole experience was like just how invested people are into putting on live entertainment. And so this will lead to the back half of the podcast in a bit, but I really wish people would take the time to understand the amount of work that goes into an event that they show up to at like 7 o'clock, 6:30, 7:30, and I wish they wouldn't spend so much time like diving into Snapchat when up to hundreds of people have been involved over 6 months, a year, 2 years in putting the show together, from obviously the artists themselves to the production crews to the venue to all the people that work in contracts and all of the above. So yeah, and then so I worked on that for a couple of years, and then I worked for this audio-visual company, and it was corporate, and I didn't end up liking it. And the reason why I didn't like it was because the majority of people, it was all about the money. It wasn't about like the people, and the majority of the people had like very different learning styles to me. So I didn't always perform at my best because of the environment. And so I went back to school, took a media and communications diploma, and diploma again at Red College, and within that was how I started the podcast. But I'll give it back to you in case you want to ask it in a certain way.
Yeah. Okay. So you're after getting done high school over there and going through the college stage, you being in a new country, new system of ways, you found through theater, you found your place on the stage, whether it be working in the stage as far as stage production or security, whatever the best way, audio visual, you found it where your place was in the stage. Now, did that create the spark for Tea with Mike? When was the like the aha that was like, oh, you know what, I want to go from being in the production of the stage or being on the stage to being on the stage but on camera? When was that transition for you?
Sure. So there could be many, but I would say three main aha moments. So I'm in this class I think it's in the second year of this 2-year program, and always as you get closer to the end of the program, you're like, what's next? You've invested all this amount of money. I paid for this particular program all by myself, so I'm invested. So I've got to have something to show for like post at graduation. Otherwise, you're just putting money into a system, but you're not progressing personally and professionally. So this was a communications theory class, and it's one of those classes where you had to cite all your sources, MLA style, and you had to go to the library and find all your sources, which are good skills in themselves. I'm not knocking the principle, but after a while, it kind of gets a little tiring. You got the instructor with their PhD degree, like criticizing the vast majority of what you do and how they would do it, despite the fact that you don't have anywhere near the same level of education or experience as they do. So I think that's something that's challenging about certain subjects in college, where there's interpretation on the part of the instructor per se. So anyway, this is probably one of the final projects in this class, and there's a little bit more flexibility. And I'm like, yes, maybe a time not to do a blooming essay again, basically. And one of the, I don't remember the exact assignment, but one of the things on the piece of paper, no joke, was you could interview people or talk to people. Like it was probably like the last option on there. It was very, very small writing. And even though this was an assignment done by multiple, probably hundreds of students in the time that this class was taught, probably none of them had ended up doing that option because it's very extroverted. It involves other people. And the majority of people tend to shy away from that, in my experience. And so I'm like, okay, so I want to talk to people and interview them for this particular project. And it was like, you need to do this with social media stuff, because it was a media and communications course. So I started running with that idea. At the same time this is happening in the social media class, and we had a guest speaker who's actually a local entrepreneur in the town that I live in. He runs a couple of businesses. He's generally quite creative. He's in his 30s, which is for where I know not maybe where you live, but where I am, there's actually not that many young entrepreneurs per se.
Really?
There's the established business community that 10, 15, 20 years of experience, but going below that, there's not that many young creative entrepreneurs. And so he comes in and I'm like, it's a Thursday afternoon, it's dark outside, it might even have been snowing, no exaggeration. And usually at that point in the week, most people are tired and they're just ready for the weekend, usually because Fridays are like half days on colleges most of the time. The amount of classes that happen on a Friday afternoon are pretty rare. And so we were required before the class to come up with a series of like questions for the entrepreneur, for Jonathan Strum. He's actually also been on the Tea with Mike show. And so most of the people in the class weren't actually that engaged and interested in his story, but one of the things that he said that resonated with me was that he struggled. He has ADHD, if I'm not mistaken, and so he apologized if he forgot something somebody said, or he couldn't read his writing on the board. Like all things that I was like, that happens to me too. So that was kind of like an aha moment. And so everyone else is probably texting on the phone, sat back, and I'm like this at the front, probably like I'm pretty close to the front. And my eyes are glued to the board. It's not about the instructor. I blanked everybody else out. It's just me focusing on what he's saying. And like you come towards the end, and it's like, oh, then there's the question period, and like maybe one other person had a question because they're like, oh, they're like the weekend, need to get out of here. And I asked him the question, who should I be looking at or following online? Because it was all on entrepreneurship and social media, the kind of the topic. And so one of the names that he said was Gary Vaynerchuk. And I was like, okay, scribble it down. And I went at home that night and I Googled him. And at the beginning, like a lot of people, I was like, this makes no sense, like whatsoever. All of the language that he is using is so alien to me. I'm like, what's a podcast? Like, I didn't know anything. I'm like, I had Instagram, but I'd like mass followed people. I posted like 3 things. Like I barely used Facebook. To this day, obviously, because of the Facebook system. You know, when it says like 8 years ago, I'm looking at some of the things that I wrote, and it's in like block capitals with like spelling errors.
Wow.
I'm like, wow, did I write this? But I did write. And, and so, and then I'm like, Twitter, what's this? I didn't have to barely use Twitter either. So that was like the second aha moment. And then the third aha moment was obviously I've spent a lot of time in like people facing roles in entertainment, in security, and I've interacted with hundreds of people. And at the time, I was working in the box office selling tickets in the venue. And these two, like probably like 5-year-olds, came up to 5 to 7-year-olds came up to the window where I was working, and they both had phones in their hands. Parents are like nowhere to be seen, and they asked me a question. Can you think about what the question could be that they asked?
What should they do when they grow up? Or like what no, they're 5-year-olds or something smaller. Um uh no. I don't know.
No. Okay. So one would think, knowing, remembering back as much as I can to when I was 5, the types of questions I would probably ask is, where's the bathroom, or
Yeah.
I've lost my parents. You know, those
Yeah,
very.
those are like the ones I was thinking. But if it made it to the story, it's a better question than that. But I don't know where in the middle it would go. But I'm curious to know now.
Yeah, so it was, what's the Wi-Fi password for the building? No joke. And so remember at this time, I've got the name Gary V like starting to circulate around my brain, and at the same time I'm doing this college project where I've got to figure out how I'm going to interview people, and then now I've got this third piece where they're like, what's the Wi-Fi password? And so at that point in time, even though I was working, my brain was like, this is sad. Like, this is crazy to think about how disconnected we are to the world, even though technology brings many benefits and there's a lot of good things. There's also a lot of negative pieces. And so kind of all those three reasons kind of meshed together. And that was the start of the Tea with Mike podcast.
Wow. Wow. So those three things kind of just combined and fused and embodied the journey that became the Tea with Mike podcast. And how many episodes have you done so far?
133, if I'm not mistaken.
133 episodes. God damn. Now, for people listening that are thinking about starting podcasts, what were some of the hurdles that you went through in your head before you began? Was there any moments besides not knowing even what the technology was that brought you out, or was it more like, oh, maybe I shouldn't do this, or like what things helped you kind of overcome any hurdles, if you had any, to start your podcast?
Good question. I would say the judgment of other people, even though it very small letters on the project assignment descriptor was you could interview people. I had to work hard initially to convince the instructor, who had clearly written this piece of paper, like that I could actually interview people and as part of this project, and they put tons of restrictions on it, like it's got to do this, it's got to do that, it's got to do this. But I'm like, I'm not giving up here. Like, this is something that I really want to do, and it's interesting to me because I always love to talk to people, even from school, and then even in college. I'd see someone in the hallway, I'd be like, hey, how's it going? I'd see them again, like 5 days later, I'd say it again, and then the third time we're trying to start a like conversation, because you often see people at very random moments throughout the day. So eventually she said I could do it, and then obviously she kept checking in with different people like around the classes, because we had quite a while to do this project. And every time I'd start like talking about it, everyone was like snickering, and like it was, I think in some ways it was playful, but then at the same time, like, are they trying to discourage me at the same time, just because I was different in the group of people that I was in? And now that I look back at it, I was like, the reason why they were like that is because they know they wouldn't have the confidence to do what I'm doing themselves. And so initially I fought basically against everybody else, the instructor and all of the other students in my class. So it's probably about 18 to 20 people, if I'm not mistaken, telling me that this was a stupid idea. And then when I was like obviously first starting, like I had a lot of people in England like just jumping on the banter wagon, like, oh, this is terrible, and all of this. So yeah, definitely at the beginning it took a lot of self-belief to make that step to start. And I don't actually even think I had self-belief in myself at the beginning either. I just think I was determined. It was a determination piece to prove people wrong. I'm not afraid to go left when everyone else goes right, which in a lot of cases can actually be harmful and the wrong thing to do. But in this case, I'm very glad that I stuck to my guns.
Yes, sticking to your guns and sticking out from the masses, from the horde. I also think that because you going from the UK to Canada, going from one place to another place where you don't fit in, the rules already established, you're kind of like that odd duck in a new scenario. That feeling, because I had a similar thing with myself. I went from living in a city to moving to a suburb. So it wasn't as drastic as yours, but it was the same. Like I was from a different culture and I came somewhere else and I was like, holy shit, everything's so different. And it's not until you're out of that, when you're in it, it's like, fuck, I want to be like everyone else. I can't really, you just have more of an inclination to be like everyone else. But once you move out, I feel like for me personally that after leaving and being in that scenario, I'm more comfortable being in other scenarios that I feel the same way. So even if that sticking out from the crowd and kind of sticking to your guns, even though you're doing something that's not conventional or normal to everyone else, because you had that one moment in your life where you were that just no matter what, I feel like it's easier for you to navigate that in the future. Would you agree with that statement?
Yes, actually, I've never actually thought about that, but there is probably some correlation between moving at such a late stage in my compulsory school education to starting the podcast, if you're looking for like a deep root. Yeah.
Because I think I just hearing from your story, I'm like, yeah, it's something I feel like resonates from people that I've also met on the show. People that just have, the more people that are inclined to do things that people have their ideas that they have. People have ideas that then have people that have ideas that they'll talk about, and people have ideas that they'll execute on. And to get to that stage of execution has a certain level of like, it's not a normal thing that many people are going to be doing, whether it be a podcast, a new fitness regime. There's a lot of things that people don't usually get to that stage. It's kind of like, no, I don't know. I don't want to do this. I don't want to be weird. And to get to that last stage of being like, oh, I'm doing what I want to do. And people will either make fun of you because of, they don't have the confidence to do it themselves, or they just want to be haters, or people believing you just because you're doing something they wish they could do. They're still like that, but you're still in a position where you're like, you're on stage again. You're back on stage, whether it be in theater or whether it be even doing security. You're in that position where you stand out more than everyone else. So I think that's huge. Now, like hearing your story just is good to hear, because I'm hearing certain things that like resonates with me too as a person. And I find that creators overall kind of have something that like they were not always they didn't fit in all the trying to think of a good metaphor. Like they didn't fit in. They were like
the
a flower
of society.
Yeah. Like they were a pepper and a bunch of salt, or like a flower and a bunch of weeds. Maybe not weeds. I don't want to call everybody else weeds, but they were a brighter color amongst all the other colors out there. So it made them stick out a little more. Yeah, I don't want to call people weeds.
No. It's just super interesting, and because I also wouldn't consider myself to be that creative, right? I just simply I've always been fascinated by storytelling and hearing other people's story. And my favorite pieces of content to watch on like the internet, things like America's Got Talent or singers like Ed Sheeran, anything that really encaptures that storytelling element, and that extends to also things like illusion and magic. I just love all of those things that go to deeper emotional places, or go beyond what's possible.
That there's this, and there's so much more that you don't even know is possible until you look for it. So I agree with that. Now, what's your current part, your journey, the Tea with Mike journey? What are some of your current thoughts, things you're going through? Just like your whole, if you could summarize where you're at right now, how would that be for you?
Yeah, so over 2.5 years, I've gone from zero to something, but the next challenge is, how do I scale what I've started to like 10x where I'm at right now? Because I believe in what I'm doing, and like everybody that I have on the show, like there's always at least a minimum of one moment where you're like, somebody needs to hear this. So the question I'm trying to wrestle with right now is how do I go from remember where I came from at zero, but not rest on my laurels, and how do I keep like scaling the podcast? So that's probably one of the biggest things on my mind right now, along with how do I get the community to be as active as possible within the resources that I have at my disposal.
I love it. So figuring out how to grow, how to scale the podcast to the next level and increase the community of the podcast as well.
Definitely.
I think that is the golden ratio of what you have to do for the podcast game over and over again. Now, do you feel like throughout your podcast journey, going from 1 to 50, 50 to 100, 100 to 130, like that growth of each one, do you feel like there was any particular skill that you struggled with more in the beginning that you kind of overcame? Like what were some of the hiccups that you had to fine tune as you progressed in your craft?
Sure, definitely episodes 1 to, I'll just summarize that nice and like quick. So between 1 and 10, figuring out like some of the technical stuff, how am I gonna record this? The show started off as an Instagram live, and then I realized that the cons of that are what happens, especially at the beginning when I know less. It's what happens if they don't show up. I'm just sitting there. Like episode like one, I think it's 1 to 3, like has a bunch of Instagram comments like scrolling through it, and then so somewhere around the first 10 episodes, and then I went to Facebook, I think, for an episode that didn't work out either. And then I went to like, I guess, Skype, which I'm still on today, and over time, I've gradually tried to make the production quality a little bit better. At the beginning, I didn't have this background that even you see now. I didn't have any headphones. I didn't have a podcasting mic. I had an old iMac, like 27, I think it was, but it's a ton of background noise. It was like, and this is the best part about doing things like this, is reflecting back on how far you've come, because when you're in the moment, you don't think about these little mini stories within the big journey, right? And that was one. And then I guess the next challenge was, how do I go from just interviewing or talking, not even interviewing, because I just thought at the beginning you could improvise and not do any like research on the person that you were talking to. So that's another key piece, bringing in research and spending 1 to 2 hours trying to pick out the best pieces of the story. So that's a skill within itself. And then the next challenge would be, how do I go from just interviewing people that I know or was stupid enough to say yes, and to like people that I don't know. So I guess that was the next challenge, and trying to figure out how to use social media to help me that, especially at that time, Twitter. I find Twitter is a really underrated place for making connections. I think genuinely you can make more connections on Twitter than you can do on Instagram and Facebook combined.
I think so too.
And so, yes. And so then there was that piece. And then that continued up until maybe like episode 30, 40. And then don't want to go too much into it, just want to capture the whole story. But I managed to get on there, Tea with Gary Vee. So that provided like the first major piece of the first major exposure piece. And then so I'd say from that point, kind of gradually moving forward, like everyone has a great story, but at that point you notice it's different. The best way to put it is not different caliber, just like different people with a more variety of different stories and backgrounds, because then you start to see people from different countries and different professions. So there was a little bit more variety is the best way to put it. And then I guess the next big moment was probably episode 100, if I'm being honest. Got a little bit of local media coverage, which was cool considering there's only 3 like media places in town. So like
that's huge.
Yeah, and then obviously I had guest 100 was Andy Kranak, who is now the president of Free Friends. And what was special about that was that only happened because it felt right in the moment. If we accelerate to this year, and I was doing episode 100, it wouldn't be him, because right now he's just like way too busy. And if you Google it, which I don't think many people actually do, he's only actually ever been on like 3 podcasts. So wow. as he accelerates in his career, I'm like, I had him on Tea with Mike. Another good example is, this is one connected to my local community. Like probably in episode 16, I had a Paralympic swimmer called Tammy Cunnington, I think it is, on the show, and she just got back from competing in the Paralympics in Tokyo, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then you see all the press around that and how she retired, and then you're like, whoa, she was on the Tea with Mike podcast. And to me, it doesn't matter that it didn't get 200 shares, 58 likes. I know that I'm a part of her story just as much as she is a part of my story. So I guess that's a brief overview of the progression. And then just for the whole thing, figuring out how to get word out to more people and creating micro social media content, which is where I'm really starting to try and put more of my time and resources into.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I think one of the biggest gems of having a podcast and catching people is like getting them before they hit their next tier. So you're making a bunch of almost investments in each person you interview, because the bigger they get, they just, you're like one of the springboards that help them get to where they are. So having you guys both a part of each other's journey is huge. I think
yeah.
No, I'm listening. Go ahead.
Yeah, and then to your point, eventually, as you write, as people springboard, that creates a whole nother type of content. And it's like 5 years ago on this day, Dom Jackson graced the podcast or whatever it is, right?
Exactly, man. Same here. So I seen the value in people before everyone else does. It's such a great time to capture the pureness of the relationship with them, because right now at this stage, it's still just fun. It's always going to be fun, but it's fun and like the world's not watching the same way. But once you get to that next tier, it's like, wow, they were on your show. And I was like, yeah, man, we've been here.
Yeah, where were you 28 years ago?
Yeah, exactly. Where were you at?
I'm trying to shy away from it a tiny bit, but yeah, because that's what Gary Vee is able to do so well. Like he did like 10 plus years of nobody watching, and then we're basically building the journey, and also the backstory for the future is really all that we're doing.
Absolutely.
So then we can post about it later.
Yes. It's all history. It's all story. It's all the journey. Now, Mike, why did you want to be Tea with Mike? What inspired the tea thing? Where did that whole concept come from?
Yeah, sure. So as you know, like probably one of the hardest things to do, like on a podcast or anything. It's not actually all the work required. It's how do I come up with a name that's different enough where I can get the domains and all the intellectual property, in order, obviously, largely to make sure you're on the first pages of Google if people like search the right things. And so I'm thinking about that, and I come up with a whole bunch of different names. Like I'm very visual, so I brainstormed it on a piece of paper, and I'm like, none of these are really working. So I asked my parents about it, and they asked me some questions. So, well, what do you like to do and stuff? I came up with some really silly answers. And
What was the
one
silliest
of
one?
the honestly, I don't remember, but one of the things I know that I did write down on the piece of paper was tea. And another one that I wrote down was talking or chatting with people, so something to that effect. And then there was another bit where it's like, who am I? Well, I'm Mike. Well, what does that mean? And you're trying to keep it simple. You like, you don't want it to be 82 characters. What are people gonna remember? And so playing around with all these different combinations, trying all these name generators, and you're like, no, 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 and then looking at all these words on the page, and it's a mess. Man, I wish I still had it, because that would have been a special piece of content. The only three words left on the piece of paper. Oh, and then obviously I thought about my cultural background, being from England a little bit. That was a little bit of it too. And yeah, the only words left were tea with Mike, and that's how it goes. That's kind of how the name came about. Yeah.
Wow, that's a pretty cool process of going through it, kind of just scratching off and then just, and that's all, having all that be what ended up with. That's dope. That's really dope. So Mike, do you have so with your current part of your journey, do you have anything else that you want to tell the world? Just anything on the top of your mind, anything you want to tell them right now in this moment in time of this part of your journey, anything you want to be remembered for this episode with?
I know it's cliche, but I'm good at cliches. And just kind of believe in yourself. If you really want to do something, you should try it, because you don't know where it might lead. And I really want to encourage people to to consume content that impacts them, versus watching a piece of content just because all of your friends watched a piece of content. And everybody has like different interests, and I would just encourage people to explore really about themselves a little more, like what content do they really resonate with. Like for me, it's like I said, it's anything related to storytelling, and the reason why is because of the emotion and how it makes me feel inside, and I resonate with the performer or whoever it is. So there's like that's connection piece. So I would tell people to watch and consume and support content that they connect with, and has a good meaning, basically. Now, of course, I'm not encouraging you not to watch all the ridiculous stuff out there, but I just hope that, I guess, that you support content creators that actually put their heart and soul into it with limited resources, and you give it a chance, even if you may be skeptical, versus following the bandwagon of like whatever the media is hyping up in that moment. So that's probably what I would say.
Love it. I love it. And Mike, how do they find you if they want to follow you?
Sure. So if you just Google Tea with Mike, you'll find all my stuff. teawithmike.com. Made the website super user friendly now, really easy to listen to each of the different podcast episodes. There's just a brief description about like what we're talking about in the episode, and it's even categorized so you can go straight to categories that might interest you. We got sports, entrepreneurship, business, entertainment. There's a whole range of different categories. So that can really help you filter out to get to something that you might be interested in watching. And then just Tea with Mike on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Yes.
Awesome. Do you remember what number my episode is on Tea with Mike show?
No.
It's fine. I'll double check it too. I was like,
I think.
that's all right. I'll put it in the notes. I'll find it.
I feel like it's somewhere in the 50 to 70 range.
Okay. Well, somewhere. All right. That's good to know. So if you guys want to find that one, it's in the 50 to 70 range if you haven't watched it already. And watch the other ones too. But I figure, might as well plug up mine while I'm here.
Of course, man. Yeah. Yeah. So, and please share the Tea with Mike show with your friends. Every week is like completely different, and I can guarantee that in 133 episodes, there's at least one thing, at least today, that you will learn something or find interesting, or even know somebody who might find it interesting.
Absolutely, guys. So definitely give Mike a follow, listen to the show. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Journey. Have a great day and take care.